Good afternoon. Good evening. In the absence of a great turnout, we'll go ahead and provide those that are interested with some information tonight. As you recall, back July 12th, our friends from ECU from Merle Flood and Mary Archibald came and told us about a project that they were going to be working on for us on the housing in Beaufort County. Tonight we're here to hear the results of that project and the research and the recommendations specifically that they are going to provide to us, that hopefully we can take that information and move forward. I would have asked you to approve the minutes, but we didn't send those out, so we will send those out from the last meeting and we can approve them at the next meeting. Did everybody get a copy of the agenda?
They're printed out.
Oh, okay. We put them where we could get easy access to them. I have had the opportunity to go through the complete report that ECU is going to provide us tonight, and there's a lot of data and a lot of information in there. But I think in the end, it's going to boil down to what we knew, which is we don't have houses in the price range that people that work here can afford. And we have to figure out a better way of helping builders and developers take care of that for us. So without further ado, I'll ask Merle to come up and introduce everybody, or on his staff anyways, and what their plan is going forward here. So thank you, Merle.
Commissioner, thank you. Manager, we thank you for the opportunity to have worked in Beaufort County. We found this to be both an exciting, very friendly community to give us great information to really kind of help you understand the market, what's missing. As the Commissioner mentioned, you already knew that you had some issues that you wanted to begin to tackle. Hopefully, we're going to provide you with a glimpse into some strategic information as to what population is most affected, what the price point is, and then some examples of things that you can do to have an impact on that market. Joining me is Mary Archibald. She is a senior in the Community and Regional Planning Program and also an honor student. She is certainly one of our brightest students, and she has jumped into this project beginning in June 100%. She's done an excellent job in digging through the data. She's going to present to you a snippet of the data, some of our findings. Then I'll come back and talk about sort of where we go next, and then give some examples and some things that you might consider. Obviously, you've got to right-size it for Beaufort County. We realize that, but hopefully give you some ideas and a glimpse into some things you might do to affect and have an impact. Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Flood, again for his guidance, and thank you to the county commissioners for allowing me to. I've really learned a lot. I've gained a lot of experience, and it's been a fun process to get to know this town more. I also work in this town. I've been working here for about 6 months, about the same time that I've been working on the project here. So I've been working at a local restaurant, so I've really learned to make this community my family. I've met a lot of great people here. So we do have a PowerPoint. I think it will show up here. Yep, there it is. All right, so this is going to be our housing market analysis. Some of this might be a refresher from last time I was here. And there's a lot more data in the official report, but this is kind of the key findings for Beaufort County. Okay. So this community, at a glance, we have a population here of just under 45,000. That's about a 7.9% decrease in population from around 10 years ago. A big reason we were called in here is to investigate that. The median age is going to be 46.7 years. As many of you know, it's more of a retirement community. There's a larger older population here in Beaufort County. By our population pyramid, it's constrictive, meaning that we have a larger senior population and our workforce population is going to be smaller. So within this project, that's kind of what we focused on. It's going to be our workforce population. which we'll get into in a few slides. So our annual income overall for Beaufort County, the median income is going to be just under $52,000, which is around $10,000 less than the median income for the state. A key statistic I want you guys to remember is that 48.6% of the population here earn an annual wage of less than $50,000. Employment. So what do these people who work here do? Our top industries are going to be education, manufacturing, construction, retail, public administration. But I really want you guys to focus on the graph that's in the bottom right. This is one we made that kind of shows the workforce population, the people who keep the city running. That's going to be your construction workers, your firefighters, your police officers, your first responders, teachers, retail workers. Of those, our highest median hourly wage was around $22.58, and this was for public service, public administration, equaling to about $46,968 annually. The lowest wage was our retail workers, making just over $15 an hour, translating into just $31,000, a little under $32,000 annually. So where are these people living? What are their, what is the housing occupancy characteristics and age? From the data, from the census, we found that 72% of occupied housing in Beaufort County is owner-occupied, and 20% is renter-occupied. What this kind of told us is that there's not a lot of options for renting here in Beaufort County. Oftentimes, renting is going to be the cheaper, the more affordable option. We also have the housing age. So a very large proportion of housing here in Beaufort, especially since it's a very historical town and county, is that a lot of these homes were built before 1980. This can bring forth with it a lot of different concerns. You have expense for maintenance of these older homes can be more. Before 1980, a lot of things were used that aren't used anymore. So we have lead paint, we have asbestos, and these things are what's going to cost money to maintain, to repair. That's more money that a homeowner is going to have to spend. That's more money that a landlord may have to spend and put that money onto their tenants, so more rent. So affordability in housing is typically defined as 30% or not spending more than 30% of your monthly income on your housing expenses, whether that's your mortgage and utilities or whether that's rent. So the ideal is 30% or less. This graph is going to show Beaufort County from the H&T or Housing and Transportation Index. This one is specifically housing index. So that lighter yellow color is going to be good, all the way up to kind of the light green color. But once you get to the darker green, the darker blues, some people are spending 40 to 50 to upwards of more than 50% of their annual income on housing. And that's just not affordable for many people who live here. So one of the things that we asked from Washington, or from Beaufort County, specifically from Washington, was areas in Washington that they could see as possibilities for higher density development. They got back to us with around 370 acres of available land for development. And so then we went from there and we said, what of this 370 acres, what of that land might have some constraints that may make it impossible for possible development? So then we talked to the Public Works Director, Miss Hope Willard, and we sent it to her and she sent it back to us with a few different things that may, cause development not to be an option. So 4 of those acres were in floodplain hazard areas. Just under 67 of those acres were actually already in development from what she could find. And then an astounding 255 of those acres would need sanitary extension, which doesn't rule it out, obviously, but it would cost more to the developer, to maybe the county. And then there was even one area that was about 40 acres that had additional development constraints. It was by the airport, and it was also in the airport canal. So that leaves us with around 65 remaining acres that were possible and that were available for high density. So one thing Meryl and I decided was that to be able to find and create this affordable housing areas in Beaufort County, more areas needed to be identified as possible for higher density development, multifamily housing. Alright, so this is just kind of a list of a lot of things when it has to do with the real estate landscape here in Beaufort County. The average sales price of a home is $235,000, and the median sales price was around $210,000. Then we look at median rent, which is $770, but we have heard that this can now be upwards of $1,300 a month. This data is from 2021, and so we've talked to many people in Beaufort County, and we've heard that it's more closer to a higher number, over $1,000. The median housing cost with a mortgage, according to the census, was $1,315. And then we have the cost of land, so that's going to play an important part on where you can develop and the price of that development, how affordable it can be. So lot sales range anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000, which may seem like a large interval, but as you know, for a coastal community, waterfront community or waterfront land is going to cost a lot more than maybe some more inland land. Alright, so our key findings, kind of the bottom line of the whole project, was this affordability gap. You have individuals, again, as I said from the first slide, we saw that 48% of the population here in Beaufort County make less than $50,000. However, to afford the median cost of a home, you would need to make $52,596. So there's a gap there. There's a lot of people who simply cannot afford. That's 50% of the population that can't afford to have a house here. Not to mention, many of these people, probably since they can't afford a home here, commute from neighboring communities, Pitt County, from Raleigh, and that's really just taking away more money that can be put back into the community. And you have people who may live in Pitt County, they're going to spend their money in Pitt County. And so having that 30-minute commute, which is what we saw that a great proportion of people in Beaufort County have a 30-minute or more commute, making it more likely that they live in a neighboring community. Land value, again, plays a significant role in the ability to create affordable housing in regions, especially with coastal communities where there's higher land values. Housing conditions, so many of the residents in Beaufort County may face substandard living conditions, such as incomplete plumbing, kitchen facilities, and utility sources. And again, over 5,000 of these homes were actually built before 1980. The key areas for development, so we saw that a lot of these costs are closely tied to land prices, but we also looked into where we were given land, where was the possibility to have higher density development, and we just found that there wasn't enough acreage of land to produce or to give, I guess, more options to where you can put high density development. And finally, one of the big things is will, political will, community will, what's known as NIMBYism. So there's some people who love the character of, I love the character of Washington. I work here, it's a small town, I'm from a small town, and there may be some people who may think that building high density development may take away that small town feel, but however, there's people who work here in Washington that can't afford to live here. So that's taking money away from the community, taking away a tax base where it could be very helpful to Beaufort County to continue to grow. So from there, I'm going to pass it over to my friend Mr. Merrill, who will give some recommendations and some expert insight into how to move forward.
Thank you, Mary. A couple of key points that Mary talked about. High density. So the cost of construction is pretty much fixed. The cost of supplies to build a house is fixed. Land is one of those factors that has a big impact on the cost of housing. And so when we talk about the effects of land and density, in order to get a project to cash flow, you've got to typically increase the number of units per acre to be able to cash flow a project. Let's talk a little bit about where you are and maybe some things that you can do. It really does come down to the dollars and cents of it all. So as Mary mentioned, $1,315 being your median mortgage, that really requires someone making $25.28 in hourly wages over a 40-hour work week annually. If the median rent is about $1,300, as we've heard, and we have no reason to doubt that, someone would have to make about $52,500 to be able to afford that rent. And that's only about 4 cents difference in a median mortgage work or hourly wage versus a rental wage. There's negligible difference. The difference is de minimis. So you've got, you're in a pretty rough spot. If the mortgage, what it takes to pay the annual mortgage or the monthly mortgage and monthly rent costs are the same, you're really in kind of a situation that really needs some attention. Again, key indicator, 48.6% of the population earns less than $50,000 in wages, or $24 an hour. Again, some of the very same factors, key takeaways, the median rent, we talked about that. The median listing price of $235, median sales price of $210, or average sales price of $210, that's really kind of telling as well. That really feeds back to that. We did find that over 47% of renters are paying more than 30% of their income for housing expenses. So again, that indicates that there's really a need for more supply in the housing market to be able to address a potential need. So what happens when this happens? I'll talk about what we did in Greenville in 1992, but we face these very same questions. And so to address a housing shortage and availability problem, there's three things that I think communities need to do. And that's increasing the supply of housing that's available through a variety of programs and approaches that we'll talk about. Develop programs to assist first-time home buyers obtain homes. And then how do you preserve your existing housing stock? That's still a valid form of affordability. Remember some of the key indicators that Mary provided you with on your labor force. Your labor force is here. These are the folks that it really takes to keep things going in your community. And these are their wages. And so right now, there's a shortage of housing to address this population. So if we know that that's the case, and it comes down to a dollars and cents approach, here are some things that communities might do to really be able to address this affordability issue. Communities, I think, have to be involved with providing affordable housing, because without public involvement, there is no incentive for the private market to do it. They can't make it cash flow. So it takes a partnership. It takes a partnership of local governments. It takes a partnership of private not-for-profits and the private sector working together to do some things. Here are some ways that local governments get involved. They assemble land and make it available for development of developments that have affordability tied to it. Participate in the cost of infrastructure. As we know, a lot of what happens underground is cost that's passed on to the end buyer, and there's a lot of costs there. And so sometimes participation in those costs are a necessary way that communities get involved with making developments more affordable. I talked about public-private partnerships. We'll talk a little bit about those a little further, but really it involves attracting outside developers that have expertise and experience in developing housing that serve these particular population groups. And I'm not talking about public housing. I'm not talking about Section 8. I'm talking about housing that's affordable and provides much needed housing to grow your community over time. And then again, preservation of existing housing stock. This is typically through housing rehabilitation programs. One of the things that we heard, homes that are offered for sale do not stay on the market very long in this community. They're gobbled up. You have a lot of outside, what I'd call snowbirds, that are investing in the South, taking resources and saying, hey, I will buy a property and live there during sort of the not so good months in the North. I may keep a property there and then move here during sort of the more pleasant times. And so you have a lot of that that's going on in your community too as well. Some communities, as part of this, and it's a package, they'll develop first-time homebuyer education programs, down payment assistance programs to help first-time homebuyers get into homes, secondary mortgage programs, and then participation in the actual cost, whether it's construction, infrastructure, or other affordable housing developments. For rental housing strategies, and remember I said you've got to have a multi-layered approach. You have to also address the rental housing needs. I would recommend and have participated in development of proposals to attract rental housing developers to your community. Because that's a segment of the market with 27% of your housing stock being rental. There's certainly a need for that entry-level worker to have an option, because not everybody is ready to become a homeowner at the same time. And some people are not ready to become a homeowner at all. You have to have options within your housing market to address the various needs that you find in your community. Inventory of unused public land. Sometimes in communities, there's public land that has no intended use, no immediate use, that could be great development sites for housing developments. And partnering with outside developers with low-income housing tax credit developments, and we'll take a look at those and what some of those look like. Some of the things that I think are important with preservation of your housing stock would be to seek grant funding to help preserve that. There are folks that are living on fixed incomes that are in jeopardy of potentially losing housing because of its condition. Mary talked about some of the conditions of houses and the age. Once properties get past about a 25 to 30 year window, you start seeing maintenance needs. And if you're living on a fixed income, being able to repair homes to a state of livability becomes a challenge. And so local ongoing housing rehabilitation programs are pretty successful. Development of strategies to approach grant programs. It can't be a one-shot deal. You have to have continuous funding, because typically communities have waiting lists of folks that have needs. And that's an element of affordable housing that gets sometimes lost in trying to provide rental housing or new housing opportunities as maintenance of that existing housing stock. And then code enforcement. That's often a very controversial step, but you do have to have an active code enforcement program that requires repair of homes that are falling into disrepair. That has to be part of the strategy. Now, how you apply it, you have the ability at the local level to determine, the level of severity and who you target, but I think having an active code enforcement program is definitely necessary. It does take ongoing commitment, and it is a cycle. You'll do some things, you'll have some impacts, and then it's a continuous cycle, but it really requires programs, funding that can be annual. Whenever I talk with communities about housing needs, everyone says, yeah, we've got a problem, but we don't have enough money to fund our way out of it. How do we have at least an annual allocation that can give us something that we can begin to address and have an ongoing program? And so I'll talk about an effort that we've done in a 5-county region just north of here to help do that. There are Department of Agriculture grants, because this is a rural county, that could provide some assistance. In the back of the report, we provide a list of resources that you might develop a program of grant seeking to address the housing needs. And I can't say enough about nonprofits and public-private partnerships. Those really do yield benefits. And sometimes your entry in bringing a nonprofit developer or a for-profit developer is land. That can really create some opportunities. So, where do you go next? I think somebody has to be the lead entity. I was speaking to Commissioner Revolts before the meeting. I really commend you on doing this. I spent 30 years in local government. It was primarily a municipal function. Counties are getting involved more and more because you see the train that's coming. Most people say the light at the end of the tunnel. You see what's going to happen if you don't have some intervention now. And I think someone has to take the lead. It does need to be a multi-layered approach, because one size won't fit all, and you're going to need to do a couple of things and have different funding sources to accomplish the goals of impacting housing in your community. We talked about higher density. I think I spent a little bit of time on that. But I think because of Washington having the most infrastructure to support higher density, we spent a little time there. We did contact other units of local government here within Beaufort County. Some calls went unanswered. Some were, well, we don't know. Washington has the biggest sort of infrastructure network to handle some of this. And so we think there's probably a need to have additional areas designated for higher density development. Identifying other funding sources that can be used exclusively for affordable housing. I talked about inventory of public land as another step. I think a systematic grant program strategy is definitely part of that strategy that you would want to develop. There are opportunities to review your local policies and consider some amendments to reduce development costs. Everyone talks about permitting fees, and I know that that's a source of revenue, and it creates a very slippery slope whenever you start reducing fees for one aspect of construction over another. That may be something that can be utilized because with affordable developments, everything is a cost and that's passed on to the buyer. And if you've got a market that can't really sustain a lot of cost increases, looking for every opportunity to shoulder some of that cost with the developer can provide some benefits. Low-income housing tax credit opportunities, I'm going to talk about that. I think I'm repeating it a couple times. And then a program called the Home Consortium, which could bring some annual funding to a 4-county region. I've modeled it with the most likely county adjacent to Beaufort. These are the 4 that mix. You may not want to pursue this, but it could bring some annual housing dollars to this community of about $600,000 annually. So, an exercise in a study by a group of educators and a great honor student. Well, this is a little bit different. I spent 30 years in local government, 29 of those years with the city of Greenville, and had quite a bit of years developing, administering, and oversight of the affordable housing program from its infancy. So I worked in 1992 to develop the models used by Greenville and the programs that we developed and put into place. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that we did. Not that this would be your choice, but these are some of the things that we did and how we got to where we are in Greenville with affordable housing. We produced over 178 units of new construction while I was there and 282 units of rental that we partnered with. So things really got started for us in 1992. We did had a affordable housing steering committee that was put in place by council to discuss ways that we affect the market. And then we had a local general obligation bond for $1 million. When I say bonds, a lot of communities say, oh wow, I would not want to borrow money for affordable housing, but that's exactly what we did. Charlotte had done it at the time, and we took notes from what Charlotte did. They were a great resource for us. And we learned pretty quickly that we needed that $1 million. That's not a lot of money to revolve. It did not need to go out and just go out one time. So we figured out how to make it revolve 4 times and made some things happen. Then we became an entitlement community, and we used a number of funds in developing some of the housing I'm going to show you. We began with buying, after some loan programs, within 3 short years, we gave the council the report in 94. 95, we bought our first piece of property. Did a subdivision of 15 homes, starting at the price of $75,000 to $85,000. Now again, that's 1994. We are 30 years removed from that. I realize that. But we intervened in the market. We provided and took a piece of property that had $36,000 worth of value, created 15 homes. One of my students today, when we talked about this, said, well, the tax value on those homes, on one of the homes, the value on it is about $98,000. Hadn't moved a lot. But consider the entire tract was only worth $36,000 when we purchased it. One of the 15 homes is worth $98,000. And the city's been receiving the ad valorem tax on that annually since we completed that development in 1999.
So Merrill, talk a little bit about that and how structurally you did that within the municipality. Were you did the city RFP with developers? Were y'all the developer? How do you work that through the constraints of, and I know that municipalities have a little more ability than counties do to do that because of some of the statutes.
Yeah, and until 160D, we were, we had, the ability. So the local obligation bond was used to put in the water infrastructure, sanitary sewer, streets and roads. We bid the lots out to builders that would build homes to our standard. They would take the property through a deed transfer, but they pay us once it's sold to an income eligible buyer. And so we set the lot price to cover our expenses. We took a little bit of a hit on it because we wanted to keep it affordable. And so those went within 4 years, and so we had 6 builders is what I remember that came in, answered our call, and we deeded the lots over. And we subordinated them so that they could get construction financing. And so in that deal, they built the house, we helped them find a buyer, and with those buyers, they had incomes of about $26,000 to $28,000 back in that time period. We would also provide, if they were income eligible, a soft second from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. So that helped them finance less than $75,000 sales price, but we still sold it at $75,000 because the Housing Finance Agency came in with dollars to soften that mortgage. And so we took that and built that subdivision out in 4 years' time, doing a call for developers. We had 6 builders, 6 different builders. We were the developer in that instance. Fast forward, we moved and down the street and bought another tract. And that one had about 8.5 acres, and we did 24 units there. And those came to us almost at the same time we were finishing up. So we were getting this one started at the same time, but we had enough income coming back that we could go ahead and get started and reinvest, some of those dollars. And so this one, we purchased this one, as I remember, for I think it was $80,000 is what we purchased this for. We did 24 lots. I think we had about $700,000 worth of infrastructure in this one. And so same model, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, brick, 1,200 square foot minimum, and we helped find buyers. This one built out in about a 3-year time period. We had the same problem. We had folks that needed housing, they didn't have anywhere to go, and we were going to affect the market. The private side was not going to do it. And so we found builders that said, yeah, I'll take a chance. I'll build it on my cost, subordinate the lot, and I'll pay you for the lot at the sales price, once it sells. And so we did that. Then we had Hurricane Floyd hit. By the way, Housing Finance Agency recognized us with the Housing North Carolina Award for that, for the innovation of what we were able to do, and we were able to get that done also during a time that's kind of weird in Greenville. We had a little snow. Fast forward, Hurricane Floyd hit. We had 1,894 structures that had 12 inches or more of water, mostly north of the river event. We did have south of the river flooding, but the folks that were the most impacted were those that were north of the river, low and moderate income, lost everything. We had more water. But with the buyout packages, those families were going to make choices quick. And we needed to provide something because we didn't want to lose population with that event. So we purchased a 49-acre tract. We had 105 homes that we platted in this development. We took the bond funds, the proceeds, we bought the land, then we got an infrastructure grant from the state for flooding to put the infrastructure in. All that said, our goal and our requirement was that we sold 51 of those lots to flood survivors. But again, remember what I said, those families were making decisions pretty quickly. And so we ended up with 28 flood survivors. The state eventually said, well, because you have the affordable housing element, you are relieved from the other, 22 that you had to fill up with. But please continue what you're doing. And so we continued. We built that one out in 5 years. Again, recognized by the state for doing that. And we're using the same model that I previously described, along with some of the financial incentives to help the low to moderate income families get into the structures. We then had a new election. City Council said, that's fine, but you need to spend some time within Greenville and not necessarily subdivision development. So we started with infill lots within the city and building homes like this throughout the city, forging unique partnerships. We actually worked with the community college. This was not my most favorite, somehow I did something I shouldn't have. Favorite home, the one far to the right, but it was one that the community college built. And it was really effective. That house sold pretty quickly, and it was interior to West Greenville. We provided the funds to the students to build the house for the supplies. They had a laboratory that they worked in nearby, learning cabinet and framing skills, and then they had an outdoor laboratory that they could go and build. But they built these 3 homes, and they built them in record time, and they sold in record time. We had not addressed the rental market. We kept bypassing that, and we said we finally have to get to this idea of affordable rentals. Most of you might say, well, Greenville has a lot of rental housing. You've got a college campus, et cetera, et cetera. But we didn't have workforce-priced housing for the populations that really needed it. And so we did a call for developers on some other city land that we had called Nathaniel Village. We put some bond funds behind it. We're on our 4th sort of revolution of that bond to help with a loan to get the points. Because if you work with developers that do low-income housing tax credit, they have to have local commitment. It's a points scoring affair with the Housing Finance Agency. And so we felt really good about this development and the developer out of Winston-Salem. And so we did 48 units there. Also were awarded for sort of the innovation. And then the Housing Authority has a nonprofit arm. They said our elderly population is also lacking housing. And so we're going to do a 48 unit development. Would you partner? So we had some proceeds. We were finishing the sales at Carolina Heights. We put a $350,000 loan into this development that they paid back to do 48 units. And then we had a large development group out of Ohio that said, we're watching what you all are doing. We got an option on 4 acres and a half. We'd like to do an 88 unit development, and would you participate? And so some of the home funds that I'm going to talk about were used to help with a local commitment on this, and that's 88 units that we did. And so then finally, before I left, we had Taft Mills, which some of you may be familiar with, the Taft Development Company. They are one of the largest in the nation for low-income housing tax credit developments. And we did this one. We have $150,000, just $150,000 in this for 98 units, and that's an elderly development. This does not look like any type of preconceived idea of affordable housing. I would challenge anyone to say that that looks, pretty bad. That's a great development. It's got planting beds, it's got indoor recreation areas for the occupants, and it's done well. And again, recognized by the agency. So, I left the city in 2017 to retire, joined ECU, and then came, introduced to the State Employees Credit Union Foundation. And they said in Northeast North Carolina, our members have asked us to address affordable housing in the region. And we'd like to invest $40,000 in a development that's affordable. Well, this is 2023. $40,000 would not do very much for me in 1992. So I expressed to them, let's make this one of those efforts where we take communities and give them a resource that they can build upon, that they can do something continuous. The only way you do anything in housing continuously is to have continuity in funding. You have to have annual funding to make a difference. And so we got started with them in the spring of 2020 on this challenge on how do we affect housing in Northeast North Carolina. We had to work with a nonprofit. So we selected the CADA area. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's the Choano Area Development Association. It's a 50-year nonprofit that's been doing human service needs in the Bertie, Halifax, Hertford, Martin, and Northampton County region, from Head Start to affordable housing. And we worked with them and the county managers in that region and said, do you have housing problems? Yes. Do you have annual funding? No. If you had annual funding, would you be able to address some of your needs? Yes. Please give us, something that we can use. And so I introduced the Home Consortium Program. The Home Consortium Program is a program that bands units of local government together, and they are considered for funding annually based upon agreeing to work together and signing a joint cooperation agreement. This consortium has no money. They have no annual funding. They have a median income of about $36,000 annually. So less than you. And they said, we've got to jump on board because we've got the same problems. We're losing population. We don't have enough housing. How can we begin to address our needs? And so we introduced that in 2021, went through a long timeline as things go with HUD. But at the end, they're going to get $856,000 annually. As long as they run the program successfully, they'll get their first round of funding this fall, and they will work together as 5 units of local government to get funding on an annual basis to address their housing needs. And so this gave them an opportunity to work together and look at housing regionally, and then provide leveraging. Because these dollars, once you pull them in, you use them to leverage outside private investment, buying land and bringing a low-income housing tax credit developer in. Or if a developer is developing a subdivision, agreeing to get a number of units affordable, and you put in a lane of sewer. So you're going to use this money, in this particular case, to leverage outside investment and hopefully create more units that are affordable within the 5-county region. So I stopped with them and I said, there's some things you need to do if you're going to do this. First, you got to commit. And then you're going to want to identify and secure on-level ongoing funding, which we did with the Home Consortium. And then we're going to employ different models to really address their needs, because there's not one size that fits all. It's going to be a variety of things, and it's going to be layered. And then tackle all the needs of affordable housing in your community, from rental, preservation of housing stock, and production of housing units for first-time home buyers. But don't be afraid to partner. And that's always key, because local government can't do it by itself, the private sector can't do it by itself, and nonprofits can't do it by themselves. And then you're going to want to educate the home buyers, because the pathway to home ownership, I don't know about many of you, but those of you that bought your first house, if you can remember then, it was a little bit frightening at first. What am I getting ready to get involved with? And do I know everything in the terms that are being told to me about escrow and this and that? So there's a captive audience that wants to get involved, but they don't have the knowledge base. And so you're going to do that. And then stay vigilant. And so I'll close with one thing. When we got started, I had a lot of local banks that said, the best thing you can do for us is provide credit-eligible buyers and create more mobile home parks, and that you don't need to be involved in this local government. And so I'd said to them, well, we're going to move forward anyway. The same bankers came back and said, well, we've seen your developments. We'd like to sign on. Can we get your forms? Gave them the forms, and they said, well, if you change this, we'll be on board. And I said, well, at this point, we've already got product being sold. If you book a loan with me, we will then make changes to our program. And so people say, well, 178 homes, a lot of those folks went belly up. And I give sort of this number everywhere I go. I told my students about it today, 14. Out of 178 homes that we did from 1994 to 2017 when I left, 14 went into foreclosure. That's less than 7%, about 7%. The private banking industry did not have the same sort of record, especially when we went through 2008 and the derivatives and all of that. So 7%. I take that number anywhere I go. With structured programming, thoughtful engagement, and then commitment, it is possible in a rural community to build an effective, affordable housing strategy that yields results for your citizens. So that's my soapbox. I'll stop there, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
When y'all were looking at land, currently we have a 90-acre tract that was just zoned O&I directly behind the hospital.
Okay.
That is currently for sale. That I've had multiple developers look at, and the road and construction of said road seems to be a major downfall to it. It's been under contract a couple of times. During that process, we've rezoned all 90 acres O&I. So you've got high-density housing involved in that. was that considered in that high density?
I think because that one already probably had zoning. When we talked with the city of Washington, it was vacant tracts that either didn't have a development option on it, although Mary reported that the sanitary sewer authority reported that, some of those tracts had development. I don't know if that one was one.
There was one that she gave us that was, I don't know if it was the one you're talking about. The one she gave us was not, it was right beside the hospital, 3.04 acres, I believe. So I don't know if the one, you kind of see it. I don't know if this is the one you're talking about.
So it's directly behind that?
Yeah, so here, oh, it's this one.
North of that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we were given that one at this point in time.
So that, we had a development plan drawn up on that one with 146 residential lots and 13 acres of multifamily in that, which would just about cure that issue.
Yeah, I think, and you said there's a road
There,
issue,
there needs to be a road.
public, private?
road.
Or is it on a thoroughfare, state road? What's the road issue?
So it'd be on the 90 acres to develop
Okay.
it.
Okay.
And that's the major cost of it.
Okay, so it's gonna require a road to be installed as part of the development and,
Which would be water, sewer,
yeah.
road through it. And there was some talk, maybe of the city, partnering,
Yeah.
so to speak, on it. But I don't know how far that went. But
I've been away from it long enough to be dangerous. I know when someone subdivided property in Greenville, the developer installed the road at their cost and then installed it at city standards for us to take over.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, and so I'm assuming that's the same
Yeah.
paradigm, yeah. Is it a major thoroughfare?
It would, I'm not sure on that.
Okay.
I'm not going to misspeak on that.
So depending on the thoroughfare policy for Washington, I don't want to begin to say I know it, maybe there's an opportunity, if you had some funding locally, to
Right.
participate and do a cost share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question, Merrill. When you were developing the homes, both the new subdivision development and the infill, how did you keep landlords at bay from purchasing those and leasing them out, renting them out to individuals?
So one of the deed restrictions that we had, because it was affordable, we had to be able to follow the buyer. And we had restrictions, that if you sold it, if you created a rental situation, the financial incentives that were used to help you buy the house, you had to pay it back. So it wasn't just a open checkbook that, we're gonna do that. There were some conditions that the buyers and the borrowers had to meet in order for us to be assured that it maintained and became affordable. After, and the title, insurance title holders, they're a little iffy at times, and so you have to be a little careful beyond the level of the first buyer. But we were able to put conditions, particularly with the money, that ran with the length of, some of the assistance is considered a deferred loan and ran with the deferral period. So if all of a sudden you were not a resident there, we were able to kind of determine that through utility records or something. Luckily, we didn't have that problem while I was there.
And another program I was familiar with from Greenville was some neighborhood stabilization programs and offering assistance for first-time home buyers to get some down payment assistance. Can you talk a little bit about how that program worked and if that's one of your recommendations here?
Yeah, so the Neighborhood Stabilization Program by HUD is principally offered to entitlement communities, which Greenville's a little different than Washington. We're entitlement. In other words, we get an annual formal allocation of CDBG and home dollars. You're able to participate in the Neighborhood Stabilization Program where you don't have to use income as the primary selection process in revitalization areas. And so we set up NSB, and we were able to use those dollars to attract people because the census tract was a QCT, as a qualified census tract, where we had a predominant low-income population. And the studies are pretty accurate that you have to blend incomes in order to be successful. And so with the neighborhood stabilization program, we were able to get an area qualified, provide down payment assistance to those that were making an investment. You did not have to be 80% or less of the area median income. You could be above that, and you could qualify for those dollars. And so the secondary mortgage or the down payment assistance, it could range anywhere from $5,000 to $26,000 or $30,000.
And one requirement, if I recall correctly, because I was actually pursuing that program when we were buying our first home, was a first-time home buyer class that was put on by a local community development corporation that taught you the ins and outs of being a homeowner, for maintenance and the taxes and insurance you would have to provide. And I found that in itself pretty helpful as someone who, was going through that as a first-time home buyer.
Yeah, we used to hire specific individuals that would be city staff, and that was their job, was to do the homebuyer education course. And I think from what I understand, they still have someone on staff that's qualified. They run on Saturdays or evenings, or that was really the most successful part of our program, because you help forecast situations to keep people from getting into trouble. And that really increased the knowledge base of the buyer. And we had some that would make a harebrained mistake, but then most of them would stay on schedule.
So, yeah, I really love a lot of what you said, but I can't make the numbers work. So I was looking at like the values and the amounts that you were saying. I was trying to figure out exactly, we were talking about purchase mortgage, we were talking about numbers. I've been sitting here playing around with the calculator. So if you took 230 as a round number, which we were talking about somewhere around the average in the county, we're talking about, 230,000. I mean, at current mortgage rates without taxes, with 20% down, you're at $1,700 a month. I mean, you'd be well over 2,000 with taxes and everything else in at current interest rates.
Yes, this does not include PMI insurance, taxes, insurance that are escrowed. It does not.
And I almost think that your interest has changed a bit over the last couple, and again,
Yeah.
I understand that, I can respect that, but I mean, if I'm liberal and say 8% today, which that's a kind of a guess, but I was looking a minute ago and seeing a little over it.
Yeah.
Okay, I was seeing a little over 8, I guess it depends on who you get it from.
Yep.
Let's figure that for a good buyer, but if you're figuring a 727, well, you get my point.
Yep.
So let's say at that, I mean, you would still be at 230 without a big, well, heck, with a reasonable down payment, you'd still be, what, a 1,600, is that probably a month or more? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see a
about,
13 there.
yeah, we're looking at about $145,000 house
Yeah.
is what we're looking at, lot,
And so you
house.
have to look at the median. and
So we're about
median,
1,000 square
something
feet
less
is
than
what
that.
we can build that for.
Right, we
That's
use,
sort of the problem, that right there.
yeah, we use the median mortgage, and then we said, how much of an income would you have to be able to have to afford that? But you're right, if you're looking at something a little bit, I think we use 7% interest, 7.6%.
I played with 180 with a 20% down right there, and I'm still at 1325. So I mean, and that's again, and a big part of that is taxes, PMI.
Yeah.
A big part of that is, because you're gonna have some of that play in regardless, I would think. I mean, you have taxes if nothing else, in whatever sort of thing is that. I get what you're saying, I think that with the way that's moving, the way everything's moving, I get what you're saying with the cost.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna struggle to get that number around that 13, 14.
Yeah, somewhere around 1,000 square feet, you would be at a zero down, 145,
There you go.
150,000, you're maxed out,
Which is not-
1,300 a month. And that's no PMI,
There's no
no
taxes,
city taxes,
no
no
escrow.
county taxes,
Right.
no nothing. So, I mean, to build, you're looking at a 700 square foot home
Yeah.
Yeah.
to be affordable.
Right, at your construction cost. What we did is we looked at how much of an income it would take to be able to afford the 235. But
Yeah.
you're right, you're gonna, at
So
$150 to
your median
$170 a square foot, you're at a 1,000 square foot home. That's
Yeah.
right.
And The difficulty with that is you're looking at you need about a $4,000 to $5,000 lot to be able to
Right.
build 1,000 square foot home to make it
Right.
to make it work.
So we took about 10% off of each of our lots. And the examples I gave you, they were probably, we had anywhere from about 8,500. We marked them down to about $7,500 because, again, affordability was the issue. It wasn't on the tax roll.
Yeah.
We could take a little bit of a chance and roll it a little bit. I think really at this point, there's a decision, based upon sort of when you put together these studies, what do you do now? You told me my ailment, now what do I do next? I mean, I think forward motion of any step. I mean, the easy play would be if you had an inventory of public land and you had certain sites that you felt were more likely to be good candidates for high density, and you could fight through the political will or the political battles to get that designated, do a call for developers. See who will meet you and say, yeah, I'll develop a product there, because the land and the value of itself may qualify under the qualified allocation plan as local commitment in a low-income housing tax credit deal. And low-income housing tax credit isn't, again, Section 8 housing. This is families at 60 to 65% of the area median income. It's the folks that are working in the personal service area. It's people that may be in your education system, may be public service workers. And this is, putting that property out there for someone to do a quality development and get some units in place that will serve at least one part of your market, and then you build from there. So, that's a low-hanging, easy fruit sort of, let's do this and see what it yields.
And what was the acreage that you found that the city owned that was possible to do that?
Yeah, we did.
And that was in
It
Washington?
was 66 from what they gave us.
Yeah.
originally.
Now, that's what's left, the zone, but
You got
They were
66
available.
acres?
They were
They were
available,
green,
they
they
were
gave
not
us-
owned by the city.
Yeah, they gave us
That's not city owned property.
170 acres.
Okay.
yeah, but I think there were 60 acres based upon sort of what they gave us as having
So
zoning.
non-city
It was
owned.
it was not city owned.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
I don't know what the city owns.
yeah.
It's the parcel you were talking about, Abbott,
It's 60 acres by itself.
and it's owned by miscellaneous individuals? Or-
Yeah, individuals, yeah. So I'm just curious why that acreage wasn't, because that would double your acreage right there. I mean, that's interesting, and it's in the city limits. Yeah, kind of a weird statement not to have that in there.
Yeah, no big games going on there, right?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Merle. And Mary, thank you very much for all your... As I went through the report, I was interested in the next steps. And I think you've already talked about those, but it was to gather municipalities together to identify areas that could be determined most feasible for developing a workforce housing. And you talked about what you saw in Washington, but obviously that sort of is just kind of a real soft number, right? Given the fact that you just got that many more acres came on the market. We have not really talked to Chakawinity in detail, or probably Bellhaven. So it would seem to me that that's one of the tasks that we have to do, is to see if we can get those municipalities interested. Obviously, by the attendance tonight, we'll have to get more personal in order to figure that out. And I don't know that there is an inventory out there that is readily available that would identify federal, state, and local land that's owned by those organizations, those governments. And so I don't know how we would go about that, but you got any thoughts, Abbott?
Well, the city itself should know what land they own.
Right.
That shouldn't be a difficult process. So we should be able to pretty quickly figure
Identify
out
that.
if they own any land and what that land is purpose for or not purpose for. Because if the city already owns it, any money you made off of it would be a positive for the community, so it would be able to reduce the price
Right.
without losing money. To use the current land would be a great idea, but, we would need to, flooding is an issue, especially when you're talking about Bellhaven, even a lot of Chapel-Entity. So it's gonna have to be a higher land, which is a little harder to find. But yeah, that would be your start, is just to print out a list of what does the city own and that's currently vacant.
Okay.
Or has excess acreage to what is on it.
So I guess I would like to have next meeting date of December 12th here and at 6 o'clock. And in the interim, my task would be to get these municipalities to identify these areas so that we can, and to get their buy-in on this issue. Because apparently we haven't done a good job of that, or they would have been here. And so I will personally meet with those mayors and ask for their buy-in in an attempt to get the interest level that we need to solve this problem. It is kind of interesting because I was listening to somebody else talk about this, and they said, well, understand what's happening. I mean, people are not moving out and getting into apartments or getting into homes on their own. They're staying home, they're staying single, and they're living with their parents. Well, guess what happens there? Nobody gets married. We have no kids. The long-term forecast is nothing but a slow, steady spin downwards. And so that's another piece of this whole thing that seems to be a challenge that is facing us, and we need to fix with opportunities for them. So I thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. And hopefully we will be able to be successful in getting a better interest level from those municipalities that have, especially those that are more interested in being receptive to developments in their communities right now.
You can kill two birds with one stone if you're able, with respect to your last comment, John, if you are friendly towards immigrants in this county, because that's where the workforce of the future is going to come from. Our birth rates are dropping in most populations,
Certainly here.
and nationally, in most populations, with the exception of the Hispanic population. And we need people to work. We need them to have good housing. We can solve the two problems at once.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay?